r/AskReddit by Reddify. Serious, what are some of the creepiest declassified documents made available to the public? The audio recordings of the final sermon at Jonestown. I think the worst bit isn't the people cheering at the idea of their own deaths. It's the children crying as they're being force-fed the cyanide, and then the eerie silence when they stop crying. FBI declassified the tapes a while ago. They're easy to find online. Haunting stuff though. Can't shake it from my brain. Eater, people keep asking if it was classified. It was. By the FBI. They wouldn't release the tapes until they were officially declassified. Despite petitions in court from surviving relatives etc. The info is all there if you wanna search for it. Operation Northwoods. Not really creepy, but kind of scary and shocking. In a nutshell, Operation Northwoods was a false flag operation devised by the Department of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1962. Basically, the CIA and/or other US government operatives would commit acts of terrorism and conduct attacks on US soil. Blame it on Cuba, and then use it to get public support and justification to go to war against Cuba. Bombings, hijackings, assassinations, and acts of terror in US cities were some of the proposed methods. Even going as far as using MiG jets painted in Cuban colors and markings to conduct some of these attacks. Fidel Castro and his communist regime had taken up power around this time, and we were hellbent on snuffing out communism anywhere it popped up. JCOS and UD wanted to provoke war with Cuba bad. They just needed justification to do it. Operation Northwoods wasn't the only plan they had. They came up with other plans as well. Ultimately, President Kennedy rejected the Operation Northwoods proposal and removed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1963. There was a rift between Kennedy and the US military leaders after this because they thought he was going soft on Cuba. We all know what happened to Kennedy later that year. This is one of the reasons why I believe Oswald didn't act alone, or possibly wasn't even the shooter in the first place. More so, when you look at 9/11 and how that all played out, and then you look at Northwoods, it paints a bit of an interesting picture as well. Takes tinfoil hat off. You can read the speech that was written for the president. In the event that the Apollo 11 crew was stranded or died on the moon, it's creepy and horrifying to think about. There was a declassified CIA handbook that covered a range of topics, most notably assassination. If I remember correctly, the book discusses weapon/planning while flippantly mentioning the Trotsky assassination and the importance of improvising. Something along the lines of how there had been tons of attempts on Trotsky's life with guns, but the killer who finally got him simply walked up to him with a piece of sporting equipment, an ice pick, and stabbed him in the head. The section felt like it was about to end with something along the lines of, but most importantly, be creative and have fun with it. Edit, for clarification, I meant ice axe/tool. Something used for climbing and mountaineering. Edit 2, on second thought, I'd rather not link to a book on how to murder people. Not exactly officially released, but the high-level Scientologist papers accessible through WikiLeaks are pretty batshit crazy. Edit, as I don't want to get sued by the church. I'll let others tell the whole story. But from what I've read, and there's a lot that I haven't, everything said in that South Park episode of Scientology is essentially correct. A lot of people don't realize this, but during wars and other significant military campaigns, countries capture one another's records. Much of this tends to be banal bureaucratic stuff, but in the case of governments that are meticulous record keepers, there are sometimes volumes of damning information about war crimes. The US National Archives has a rebel archives captured from the CSA during the Civil War. It contains descriptions of the treatment of prisoners of war, some of which are gruesome. Union medical officer logs are no better. Aren't the JFK files supposed to be declassified this October? Kamaraka Laboratory 12. The Soviet assassination laboratory. Reading through some of the ways they've killed you, it becomes clear that the number one thing keeping most people safe is their mundanity. Like the amount of people poisoned in broad daylight without them even realizing it is crazy. It's indefensible even if you knew it were coming. One of the more interesting ones was a man who knew he was targeted, so he holed himself up in a hotel with guards. The assassin sprayed a poisonous substance on the lampshade with like a tube. When the man turned his lamp on hours later, the substance evaporated due to the heat and killed everyone in the room. Another was radioactive rat poison. The target went to the hospital knowing he had been poisoned, and he was treated for common rat poison, which is what he had been poisoned by. He then died as the symptoms of his radiation poisoning had been masked by the symptoms of the rat poisoning. This isn't creepy, just stupid and life-threatening. About 10-15 years ago, I worked for a company involved in designing military equipment used for counter-IED, improvised explosive devices, applications. That is, dealing with roadside bombs. These were widespread in Iraq and Afghanistan and posed a major threat to Allied forces. One day we stumbled across a document published online by the CIA. It was a comprehensive guide to IEDs. It was clearly intended as an identification and recognition guide, but was far too detailed. It not only contained photographs and textual descriptions of various IEDs, but had details of their internal design, circuit schematics, weaknesses, etc. In short, it provided a great resource for anyone who wanted to manufacture IEDs, as well as alerting the enemy to flaws and weaknesses in their existing designs. We pointed this out to the relevant authorities and the document disappeared shortly afterwards. It was a fascinating document and I only wish I'd kept a copy. I think it was called Project Tommy. They wanted to drop 1/2 ton iron rods from space that would have similar efforts to an atom bomb with no fallout. The other day, some of us were talking about David Parker Ray's recordings. Yes. For those who just don't know, he's got 3 names. And one of them is Ray. He was a serial killer. He died before he could be brought to justice to boot. The project with the girl living in the half-flooded apartment with the dolphin. Also the FBI's campaign against liberation movements. Writing letters. Hiring people to get close to and marry leaders. Assassinations. And all manner of things. Also the weirdest was probably when our tax dollars paid for agents to wine and dine Cuban bands in Europe and encourage them to write anti-Cuban music. Haha. I think the mind control / culture docs are far worse than we typically give them credit for. Lots of talk of cookie LSD experiments and psychics. Not so much talk of inducing multiple personality disorder to create an unknowing Manchurian candidate. The documents claim that in the mid-1950s they could trigger an alternate personality in a hypnotized subject, have them fire what they believed was a loaded gun at the doctor, then have them forget all knowledge of these events. When they returned to their everyday personality, they'd have no indication of having alternate personalities, and they'd do their best to mentally avoid or explain any way discrepancies, as dissociation is part of the mind's defense mechanism against itself. The worst part? Torture is the only guaranteed way to induce multiple personality disorder. But even then it's not guaranteed unless the victim is age 5 or under. Before the ego is formed. You still with me? There are recent, confirmed cases of this technique being employed by governments and cults. For an easily confirmed example, search for a Salon article called James Bond and the Killer Bag Lady regarding the assassination of a CIA asset. Note both doctors worked on Cultura. Now search for Dr. Donald Dudley and you'll find an app article where he was caught programming young autistic children and teaching them to shoot. Sorry, I'm on mobile, so if you need links or sources, PM me. I have mainstream sources and docs to back it up. And many more leads if you're interested. There's also a zip file containing 10,000 Cultura docs released through FOIA. The official US Air Force history of the Korean War is pretty disturbing. These guys got so much glee from causing total destruction, and didn't even hide it in their official reports. Basically, after bombing the hit out of the entire northern part of the country, they wanted to keep testing their bombs, but had literally run out of targets. So what they decided to do was start bombing dams. Here's some selected excerpts. In order to test the feasibility of the endeavor and develop attack techniques, General Wayland directed the 5th Air Force to breach the Toxin Dam. On the 13th of May, 1953, 4 waves of 59 Thunderjets of the 58th Wing attacked the 300-foot earth and stone dam. The damage done by the deluge, reported the 5th Air Force. far exceeded the hopes of everyone. The swirling floodwaters washed out or damaged approximately 6 miles of embankment and 5 bridges on the important George Railway, and also destroyed 2 miles of the main north-south highway which paralleled the railroad. Down the river valley the floodwaters destroyed 700 buildings and inundated Sunan airfield. The floodwaters also scoured 5 square miles of prime rice crops. The breaching of the Toxum Dam, General Clark jubilantly informed the Joint Chiefs, has been as effective as weeks of rail interdiction. They also had no idea just how important rice was to the North Koreans, and were so excited when they realized their bombing of the dam meant total and utter starvation to the average Oriental. Moreover, an empty rice bowl symbolizes starvation, and vitriolic red propaganda broadcasts which followed the destruction of the irrigation dams showed that the enemy was deeply impressed. You can read more in Robert Frank Futtrell's book The United States Air Force in Korea, which was published by the Air Force themselves in 1983. My dad would bring me UFO reports from Air Force pilots once they became declassified. I believe it took them 70 years to become public, so they were all from the 30s and 40s. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can watch together.